Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Zac Reynolds, the CEO of Betting on Content. Zac, thank you very much for coming on the show. This episode of the Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by Dimers.com. Dimers.com is an absolute must for US sports bettors who enjoy the highs and lows of wagering. Dimers provides sports bettors with pre-game and in-play predicted outcomes for every major pro and college sport. Take a look around at Dimers.com. Gamble responsibly. Today I'm joined by Zac Reynolds, the CEO of Betting on Content. Zac, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, Jake. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
So I don't often get the chance to chat with someone who has their own agency, and I'm excited to talk about content, to talk about a few things on the periphery there, and just hear from you and your background, and certainly the path you've taken over the last few years. It's a really interesting story. So starting there, tell us a little bit about your background. Obviously, starting an agency in the US focused on content and betting and in that space is really fascinating, but how did things lead up to get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's all started in Australia. So I grew up in a place called Noosa, sort of a sleepy beach town in Queensland, and I just grew up with horse racing. My dad had horses. I used to go to the Gympie races back in the day, which it's just a little bit outside of Noosa. And went to Corbell Park, and even when I was 6 years old, grew up going to the stables, checking out Dad's horses. I don't know when I started betting, but it was definitely before I was 18 with my dad, and just grew up like that. But I mean, like a lot of Australians, grew up with sport. Rugby league, cricket was sort of the thing, and like all through my childhood, it was horse racing, but sport was never considered betting until sort of, early in the 20s when, sports betting, online sports betting happened, and all of a sudden sport even became even more fun. So that's where I started, but really background, started work with Sky Racing, which is the sort of thoroughbred channel in Australia. A lot of people would probably know that. There's they're a huge. They stream and have a lot of international races as well. So I started there for a few years. So I really started in production, in TV production. Was a producer for that, and then all along I just wanted to be part of the betting scene in Australia. So From that, I went to TVN, which was I was sort of executive producer of some of the shows on TVN, which was another thoroughbred channel, and then moved into, got a job at Sporting Bet as sort of executive producer from there. So, and then, took off basically. Sporting Bet was able to do some great things with the guys there, run by Michael Sullivan, who was a prominent CEO at the time. I think he's with Bluebet now, but yeah, just being able to build a team. That's when sort of content, it was still really new, content and in-house production, but that's where I had a vision to start an in-house agency. Started to build that in the Sydney ranks, built all the TVC capabilities, all the TV ads, all previews in-house. We built a studio within the office, a television standard studio, and I could see that's where content was heading. Really purpose-driven content. We would do. I remember at the time we would do previews with the Big Man and Duncan McRae and a few of the football personalities, and we would put it on YouTube, and it would get 500, 600 views, but it was really nothing. And then once I moved to Tab, where I was running content and just basically built the same model there. Is built a 20 to 30 team in-house agency, and we started to put the previews in the betting app, and that was really the key. And that's a great way of showing return on investment, because all of a sudden those sports betting and racing previews that I used to do on YouTube that only got 600 to 700 views, that you couldn't measure success, was all of a sudden they were in the betting app where you could measure success. So that was a really important part of getting traction in Australia.
So take us back to some of those earlier days at Sky and TVN and how content morphed. You touched on it a little bit, but I'd be interested to hear, some deeper thoughts on that time, because I even remember back then there was not a lot comes to mind. There was one show that I think Richie Callender would do with one or two others on a little panel, and they'd talk some NRL, some Aussie rules, some horse racing, and that was the only preview show that I remember back then. And now obviously there's plenty of them. Racing.com does Get On, which is pretty prominent, and all around the world there's preview shows, there's review shows, there's deep dive and in-depth look at horse races before they've happened for 20, 30 minutes at a time sometimes. So take me back to those earlier days. Was it hard to get, I guess, the license to be able to do some of those shows? Why was there pushback, or was it just no one was ready yet for that type of thing? Because most people will remember just Sky Racing wall to wall, horse racing, greyhounds, harness racing, and maybe a little Tony Brassel tip in the corner, but that was about it. So what was your viewpoint of that sort of period of time and how content evolved?
Yeah, it was actually funny because I was. It was called The Right Odds, that show.
That's
I think
right.
your dad might have even been on it once or twice. But yeah, it was. I was the producer of that show, and it was a great show. It was on Friday mornings, and you're right. It was sort of the first sports betting show that sort of touched on racing and sports of its kind. I think I think it had to evolve because. We'd had sports betting and online sports betting for a number of years, and all of a sudden you've got the same offers and the same prices and restrictions around what you can promote on TV was becoming tighter and tighter. So you had to think outside the square with content. You had to, produce branded content that was not all about just selling. It was actually about telling stories. And the other thing that, came out was a lot more preview shows to engage the audience rather than just driving offers, screaming offers, to the customers. So it was just a forced evolution where we had to really think outside the square and come up with new and engaging ways. And US is still obviously new, and it's in this offer driven state. But I think as everything sort of as it all sort of becomes the same branded content and doing those engaging previews have become more important.
So how do the executives at some of these businesses think about content, at least in your experience? Because I think it's, like you said, there's plenty of offer-driven stuff where they want to, request action from the punter and get them in. And then, like you've already started to talk about, how you've got to engage more and be part of a more encompassing experience that isn't just that. And I think that's what things are certainly trending more towards these days. But I know there's certainly owned and operated where people will control their destiny when it comes to their own content and their own properties, whether it's social or other platforms that they have with apps and websites and whatnot. But then there's also a hell of a lot of affiliate businesses and just general sports media companies that will cover a lot of this stuff as well. So tell me about your experience with some of these executives across the different businesses and how they think about content. And I'm not sure if it necessarily aligns perfectly with how you think, but I'd be curious as to how that's sort of changed over the years.
Oh, it's still a hard slog, content in terms of, really video content. I think one key thing is trying to implement like a purpose-driven content strategy. So, laying down exactly what this piece of content's for and then using metrics to deliver that. So, for example, branded content if you say from the start, we're going to get reach, we're going to get produce branded content, but it's purely for engagement or it's purely for reach or awareness, then at least they know from the start that that's what it's for, and hopefully that's what it delivers for you. So being able to define pieces of content, I think, is important for the execs, because at the time, like years ago, just in Australia, it was still a hard sell to say, look, we're going to invest $1 million in content for a particular series, because it doesn't always get return on investment straight away. But I think the important thing is like having a strategy and sort of laying that down, being transparent and saying, this is going to deliver this X, and then over time we'll be able to retarget and deliver Y. So I think that's the key to it. But yeah, it was hard going back in the day trying to convince some execs that content was the way to go. Like, in Australia, when it was, like I mentioned, a lot of same offers and prices, content and product were the two point of difference elements. So it was something, and when we were at Tab, I felt Sky Racing was really underused. Like, and so one of the big angles I went when we got to Tab was to really leverage Sky, leverage their influences or their talent a lot more for the Tab assets, and that really worked well.
That's interesting, because I wanted to ask about operators as well, and certainly now you can probably point to things that are different and differentiated. Like, Tom Waterhouse comes to mind in the Australian market, and obviously his approach to these things, Paddy Power and the way that they sort of do it might be more marketing, but also content, a bit more lighthearted and just a different approach. Whereas, Tab, at least in my experience, seems to be pretty straight and narrow and doesn't want to push the boundaries too much. And then obviously now in the US, you're seeing things expand a lot more, and PointsBet with their large brand ambassadors, which is relatively new in sort of recent years and things like that. So from an operator point of view, is it the same conversation and discussion as it is at a place like Sky Racing, for example, or TVN or a network, or is it a little bit different when it comes to content, and is differentiation the key? Is it a consistent theme and message, or are there other metrics that are being used internally at sports betting operators, for example?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a lot harder, just because the leadership group generally at an operator is business has a business background. They're finance driven, so I definitely would have to take a different strategy if you were going to work at like a content site where they understand content, but so they're probably, the metrics are different. They're looking for really engagement, more telling stories on Sky Racing, industry, more of an industry angle. Whereas your operators are, you won't have a long leash if you can't deliver return on investment with content. So yeah, definitely different, and a harder sell there. But what I do think is, if you just need to have buy-in from some of the execs, and they're willing to give you a content a real shake. When I was at Tab, they got left behind for years and years. But I had a CMO that was willing to push the boundaries with content. Like I brought in Chris Bosch from the US when NBA was blowing up a few years ago, and I think he's still an ambassador for Tab. So just I think it's definitely harder, but I think having that buy-in from like the CMO or the leadership team, and I think it's it can pay dividends. Look what Sportsbet are doing in Australia. They built a brand around engaging content, and now they're dominating market share in Australia. So for a really fiercely competitive marketplace like Australia was, content was king for sure.
So from your point of view, what makes a content specialist good or great? Because there's plenty of people who are on air that people know about and hear about around the world, and then there's probably people behind the scenes that have the ideas, that have the approach and strategy behind the content as well. So either one of those, do you have a sense of what makes those people great at what they do in this space?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of content for operators, like I think it's like it really helps understanding the punt or the betting landscape. Like having a background that I had definitely helps because you can you can easily define what content will work and what doesn't. Like having a vision, I think is really important. So I think that really helps. Like we've built an agency here, and I brought 4 Australians over with me, just that have got wagering background as well as content background. So I think that really helps. And then sort of breaking it down, it doesn't even matter if it's wagering, for an operator or not. I sort of break it down into 4 buckets. Promotional, which is obviously, and it's all purpose-driven content, right? So there's always a purpose to it. So promotional obviously drives sign-ups. So that's your TVCs, your user acquisition, short-form digital videos, things like that. You got branded content, which is really about reach and engagement and awareness, which is telling more stories rather than sort of selling. But on the back end, if you produce good branded content and you engage, then you can retarget that audience with an offer down the funnel. Third one would be educational. So obviously this is really an important aspect in the States right now is producing educational content for a new customer base, but doing it in an engaging way. Gone are the days where it's sort of a guy talking, in tutorial style because, that's just not engaging. So being able to educate this new customer base in each state in a unique way is really important. And then the fourth one, which is probably the biggest one, is the wagering or wagering drive, as I call them. So that's like, your previews. We do over 1,000 wagering videos for Churchill Downs every month. So it's all about driving an action, so whether that's driving a bet or driving them to go onto the site. So that's really key is the wagering angle, especially for the operators.
So from those buckets, what stands out in the innovation space? Because I'm guessing plenty of different people in the content world, whether they're at operators, whether they're at agencies, whether they're at broadcasters and others in the wagering space, have tried to push the boundaries. And as we know, it's a pretty competitive space when it comes to trying to grab market share, and certainly in new markets like the US. If you're not differentiating from a content point of view, then you're probably hopefully doing it on a product point of view and so on. So do you have any things that stand out from an innovation point of view that's sort of developed over the last few years especially?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. It's probably the app previews or the expert picks that I implemented in at Tab, and that we've implemented it at Twin Spires at Churchill Downs, and that's producing bespoke 30-second to 45-second race previews or sport previews that sit on the betting page. So we do, like I said, we probably do over 1,000 of them a month on all different races around all the Churchill Downs' tracks. So, and it's just, it's building, and we've got a lot of insight around that. It's like, it's building content. A 2-minute preview won't work there because punters and bettors are, next to go animals, that's what they do. What's the next race? What's the next event in sport, especially with basketball and that? There's so many things going on. So they don't have 2 minutes. They don't have 2 minutes to sit there and watch a preview. They've got 30 seconds. And so we do that across a lot of sports. We do that across all of racing for Churchill. I think they're still doing it at Tab. And it's bespoke purely for the betting platform. We did some testing, and I remember this was at Tab. It would drop. The engagement would drop by half if it was one step away from the betting platform. So if it was in, say, an info or an info center. So if you were on the betting platform and you clicked back into an info center, it drops by half the engagement because it's one step away, and punters are lazy. So it's amazing that what you can produce if it's within the betting platform. And this is video. So we do 1,000 videos within each market page. So, for example, you can look at the preview of these personalities who are well respected in those tracks or sports, and you can still look at the market while you're watching the video. So that's a real innovative play that was I brought from Australia to the US that's working great for Churchill. They now want to do more and more of it. And I think the other thing is product. I think product, a good product can only go so far unless you market it and build content around it. So, things like predictive analytics where it's customer facing, percentage of winning, like trying to educate the viewer on products like that is important. So building a content strategy around if you're going to go all in on a product as an operator, spend some money and building a content plan around it and a marketing plan around it, because awareness is key. And I see a lot of products that are great that don't get, they think, oh, well, if we pay for the product, then it's a plug and play and it'll just work. And I see a lot of products not being as successful as they could be because they don't market it well enough.
So tell me about the agency and why you started it. What was the reason why the US was obviously a target market for you? You've talked a lot about the Australian market and sort of the mature landscape there across certainly racing and wagering and the operators there. But what was the thinking at the time, and what led you to do it?
Well, probably like you, Jake. I'm a mad love watching sport. I remember in Australia when for years, like I'd get up, I'd tell the missus I was off to bed at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. She thought I was
NFL
mad.
Starts.
Yeah, well, I'd actually get up at midnight to watch the EPL, the game of the weekend which is I think about 12:30 now. So I'd get up at midnight, set the alarm, get up, go through till 3 o'clock. Then the NFL Red Zone would start, and I'd go all the way through. And I'd go to work in Sydney, and it'd get about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd be a shot duck. Couldn't keep my eyes open, but I did that for years. So I just said, when sports betting was about to open up, I was with Tab, and I thought, I talked to the wife and said, I'm going to have a crack here, and so I resigned from Tab and just went over to I think it was the betting conference in Jersey a couple of years ago. It was in 2019. And, met Ian Williams, who's the president of online betting for Churchill Downs. Had a good chat with him, and, they wanted me to bring a team over to, build an agency. We're obviously an external agency, but Churchill to be the first client, which is a pretty good first client. So I came over here, and it's been a long 18 months with everything that's going on, but it's everyone's settled. I got the Aussie. I sold them the dream. We're in Kentucky, in Louisville, and sold the families the dream, and so we're all here and now building. I think we're a team of 8 now, and just signed a new contract, a new multi-year contract with Churchill, and now looking to really expand, probably hopefully get a second office pretty soon in another location, and look to really help other operators and wagering affiliates, and anyone else that sort of needs this help. We've seen even content sites like DAZN and Fubu and Sinclair, they're all coming out now looking to expand in the sports betting space. So really looking forward to helping some of these brands.
So I'm guessing, at least in the beginning, it would have been an enormous amount of work with Churchill and get everything sort of started, then settled and organized, and then obviously the pandemic sort of changes things and makes many things far more difficult. So I'm curious, has that sort of been sole focus in the beginning, at least, the initial stages, and now you're looking to branch out a bit further, and you touched on some of the other opportunities, but I'm guessing not only that, there's probably leagues out there that are trying to think about gambling content, and some are very cautious and others are a little more aggressive. And then obviously there's teams, there's broadcasters that are showing these sporting events that want to have either their own properties involved in some way in gambling, or at least doing deals with operators as well. So it's a very interesting space right now because we are so new and we're not at the point where everyone's willing to do much more than dip their toe in the water. And if they are, then they're probably going to be unique and they might have an advantage. So what does, phase two, after you've done the first couple of years and you've, obviously done a great job to get someone like Churchill on board and carry them through this period, what does the next phase look like if you had to predict what a good outcome would be? What does that look like?
Yeah, like it's actually, it was when I decided to come to Louisville, we work best when we're involved a lot more than a traditional agency, and that's our model. That's of course a boutique agency, but really we want to be part of the team, get a lot more involved than a traditional agency would. And coming to Louisville, might have been a silly mistake because obviously there's a lot of other maybe better places like New York and to set up. But when COVID hit, that's probably what saved us, because we obviously were so close to Churchill that they were not going to let us go anywhere. So it was, in hindsight, it was probably a wise move to really focus on Churchill, do a good job for them before we expanded. And now that they're in a great position, we've got a great workflow with them. I love, and like you, Jake, I love content. I love sport. And, even in the last 3 months, I've just seen a massive change in the US. Just the excitement is, building, more states are getting involved. And, I love how even the content sites are getting, are having a throw at the stumps now. And, it's game on. And, we want to be helping a number of different brands. Our target list, like you said, it's sporting bodies, even the tier 2, tier 3 bodies that, may be in trouble because of COVID. We want to be able to, help these organizations through marketing campaigns. Sports tech, another one that, is obviously really important. And I love sports tech because I love how it can really change wagering and sports betting across the world. So I'm really keen to help startups and, sports tech organizations looking to get a foot in the door. And then obviously, helping some of the operators and content sites that really want to make a big impact, in this space. But it's super exciting.
So if you don't mind, tell us how a conversation might go with either a CMO or a head of content or a head of social at some of these places where let's say they've been in the business for 0 to 10 years. They've been obviously sports media focused and competing amongst themselves, whether it's some of the big ones like CBS or NBC or even further down from there. And now this big bomb has landed with sports betting, and it's rapidly expanding either in their state where they are already or about to come there. All these different operators, some states we're talking a dozen or more, online casinos coming, all these evolutions are happening during a pandemic, and they're basically tasked to be, and I see it every now and then when I go on LinkedIn and it's, managing director of betting or gaming content or whatever it might be, and I look at their experience or background, or I get introduced to them and I think, geez, that must be almost impossible to figure out. Some of the stuff you've talked about is not easy. It's really complicated. It takes a long time to get a handle on, and you sort of just ushered into this new role at a team or a league or a platform, whatever it might be, and you got to figure it out. What are those conversations like when you talk to them and they have to come up with a strategy and present to their board or their management team? And it just seems like a very unenviable and almost impossible task for those kind of people, who I'm sure a few of them are probably listening.
Yeah, it's it's definitely a hard task because, it's funny. Like we grew up with wagering, and we sort of my first go-to is wagering content. Like it's sort of so second nature. But these guys, especially the content sites, they know content. They know production really well, but it's just a completely different beast. Knowing how to monetize content in the wagering space, and all I would say is like in the strategy, break it down into purpose-driven buckets. What is the objective for this piece of content or these series of content, and then measure it that way. It seems, for me, it's a simple way of doing things. It's also a way that executives that might not understand the space as well, they seem to understand it, and then you can start to measure that some of that content or the marketing campaigns that you produce. But definitely breaking it down into those buckets also is like a really key element is the ability to repurpose. So when we did the Brett Favre shoot for Twin Spies, trying to get the maximum amount of the shoot. So, I thought we'd probably get sort of, for 30 to 40 different elements out of the shoot. So it's not just about the TVC. It's about all of the things that ladder down and that sort of can create that brand equity. So your short form digital pieces, your GIFs, your photo shoot, your pieces to camera for CRM, to have Brett Favre talk to the current customer base, things like that. So just making sure that you get the most out of these out of your influencers and out of your campaign shoots. That's really important.
So on that Brett Favre stuff, tell us a little bit of a background that you're able to share when it comes to that, because obviously, one of the biggest names in US sports, and certainly in a certain region, and I want to get onto regional stuff shortly, but what's the process like to get someone like that on board and then obviously do all that work? And like you said, it's not just a commercial. Obviously, I saw an interview, I think, post with, I think Andrew was talking to Brett for, 5 or 10 minutes on Zoom or whatever, and you can see some deeper background, and he talks to what he's doing, why he's doing it, and stuff like that. That seems like a challenging one to get over the line. How does one go about getting Brett Favre to partner with Twin Spies?
Yeah, it's I guess it's coming up with a pretty compelling concept. Really helps when you're talking about these influencers or ex-sports stars or even entertainment stars. It's trying to we knew we had a good chance with Brett, so we tried to adapt a concept that would really work for him. Like I've seen a few of his ads where he's maybe a bit more serious, and I just think he is a lot more comfortable, and he really works by not taking himself too seriously and having fun with it. And it really came out in the ad. We loved it. We work with the Step Studios from LA, and a couple of comedic directors that the Varsity Boys that really helped us. But yeah, we came up with the concept. We pitched that concept to Brett personally. He loved it, and on from there. So I think it really comes, if you can come up with a concept and you can build a concept, an original piece of content, even if it's for an operator or if it's just for a branded content digital piece, and then pitch it to the actual talent that you think would be perfect. I think that really helps.
On the regional stuff, have you found that it matters in terms of what you're doing so far? And obviously on the sports side, it's a state-by-state rollout, so there's certainly far more going on in certain regions than others. But I mean, Brett Favre's probably not a good example because he's certainly national, and it's not just a Wisconsin type thing or a Wisconsin Minnesota type thing, given where he played his sports. But is there any regional aspects that matter when it comes to content, or is it probably a good idea to just think more broadly and think national, think expanded when you're looking at what you're going to do and why you're going to do it? Or is there any reason why you would want to have a more singular or direct focus on a certain state or a certain region?
No, definitely regional. Like I look at each state as a country, to be honest, because obviously they're so big.
Yeah.
And for example, Pennsylvania, like they love their sport there, they love their teams there. So when it comes to content strategy and entering a new state, we build a content strategy for Churchill that is specific to that region. So even though we have our tier one ambassador, that's Brett Favre, that's nationally recognised, when we enter these states, we're building influencers and content around these influencers for the state that is going to be really attractive for that regional user base. So 100% all about regional content and bespoke content for that region, and also offers like we're doing some, a bit like some of the other operators, like PointsBet do a really good job there, where they're specific offers for that region with that talent, with a piece of content that is specific for that region. I think it's a great combination.
So I'm interested in your thoughts on how things will progress, so sort of forward-looking. And, I want to start with, at least on the sporting body side, I know it morphs pretty quickly into wagering operators and teams and so on, but just from your point of view when it comes to the future, even, you see now like the Drone League is partnered with DraftKings, for example, or I think even something like lacrosse. I think it's Premier League Lacrosse now, which merged with Major League Lacrosse, or whatever it might be. I might be, stuffing that up a little bit, but there's sort of the tiered, the lower tier stuff that's trying to push up into that top tier that might be more aggressive. And then you've obviously got the core four, and then obviously college is its own different beast, and it has its challenges as well, just given the age of the athletes and their approach to gambling over the years from an NCAA point of view. So what do you think we're going to see when it comes to, the next 5 years? Is it going to be just everything all over the place and a bit of a mad rush and scramble and nothing's going to be too consistent? Or are you going to see some themes pop up where, at least someone with your experience in this space is going to be able to sort of predict a little bit what's coming down the pipe here?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it will be a little bit of a mad rush into these different states. But, it all is going to depend on, state-by-state restrictions. Like if there starts to be, like what happened to Australia and like what happens to Britain, like what's happened to Britain, where you're going to see some maybe primetime TV restrictions where you can't promote in certain times, then there needs to be a shift. Like you need to concentrate on branded content a lot more and influencers a lot more, and the digital space a fair bit more. So it all depends on some states might be stricter than others, but I do think the sort of the regional, the regional focus is sort of the way to go. I know your FanDuels and DraftKings, they've had that brand equity through fantasy, so they can sort of play at a national level. But as sort of these other operators enter the market, I think definitely a regional approach and just checking what the restrictions are across content, because it probably will come, the restrictions. Yeah. Whether it happens in the next 5 years, I'm not sure, but it will come, and then being able to pivot and still produce compelling content that is sort of gets around the restrictions is going to be key.
So you must get a lot of emails, cold calls, a lot of people that want to be doing what you're doing or want to work in your agency or doing something similar. What do you tell those folks that do reach out, whether it's wanting to be focused on the US market, wanting to work in the industry generally, wanting to switch over from something else they're doing that have, similar experiences as we do, growing up with horse racing or growing up with sports and being very interested in wagering? And there's plenty of people out there that fall into those buckets. What would you suggest? Certainly given, the world as it is today, it's not as simple as it might have been 2 years ago to pick up and move to LA or Louisville or New Jersey. What's the best thing that someone can be doing in this time, given where we sit with, an exciting, potentially an expanding US market?
I think it's just about having a crack. It's very similar to what you need to have with content is like you can't be scared to fail, because some things are not going to work. So it's the same with getting into the industry. I think, you've got to sacrifice. You've got to have a, like gambling, take a risk.
Yeah.
I remember even before I started working at Sky Channel, I was working at Flight Centre as a travel agent. And I was a hopeless travel agent because every Saturday I would go missing for about 3 hours, and I'd go down to the local tab to put the bets on.
Yep.
But I travelled on my day off on a Sunday. There was a show called Racing Retro, which which everyone in Australia would know. My dad had a contact with Graham McNeese, and I would turn up on my day off. I'd travel from Cronulla to French's Forest. It was like a 2-hour trip at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'd just turn up. And I didn't have a job. I'd just hang around like a bad smell, I'd just sort of be so annoying and just keep asking for what could I do? What could I do? And eventually they gave me a job, and I didn't have any television experience at the time. I was pretty young, but it doesn't matter what your background is. If you know sport or you know betting, and you want to have a crack in content, just take a risk, And it's the same with when coming over here. I didn't have a job, or I didn't, I resigned from Tab from a pretty good job, but I wanted to have a crack. And if I didn't have a crack, I'd be sitting back at 60 back in Australia, wondering, what if? So I think everyone who wants to get into the industry, this is the time to do it, and just take a risk. Do what you do when you bet.
Yep. Very good. Very good. So one final question for you about the agency. What's the future look like? I think you touched on it earlier about it, but new office, new location, maybe some expanded verticals. Tell me about sort of the evolution now that you have obviously a pretty strong team there doing a hell of a lot of stuff already with huge names like Twin Spires, and Churchill's obviously a market leader in this country across multiple wagering verticals. What's your focus? Obviously being the CEO, you got to think broadly and longer term as well as the day to day. But do you have anything in mind when it comes to what the next couple of years looks like?
Yeah, it's this is the most exciting time. This is what I came here for, is to expand the business. Like I talked about, those sort of sales segments, get involved with there, but we'll definitely expand to a second location, depending on sort of the clients that we pick up.
Will it be in the bourbon region, or are you going to expand beyond just bourbon?
No, I like rum too, and a few other things. So we're going to expand there.
Down to Cuba or something.
Yeah, exactly. Bit of tequila, but yeah, I think the other thing is, like, I've got a really good partnership or an association with the CAA, which helped me get Brett Favre, and we'll play to our strengths a little bit and work with them on getting a collaborate and get some either more content or do some original content. Really want to help operators across marketing and help companies across marketing, but also want to be looking to pitch some original content ideas, with a wagering slant to it, for a lot of these content sites that are looking for original content, like your Sinclairs and your Fubu's and places like that, your DAZNs that are looking for original content. So that's going to be a key element, is and probably go work with the likes of CAA and go in with a lead talent to pitch these ideas. So that's a passion of mine. Really want to be able to do some of that as well. And, just like what we mentioned before, just have a crack and not leave anything to wonder. So, really looking forward to the next couple of years, as you probably are.
Absolutely. So what's the best contact point for someone who's listening who wants to just, send you abuse via email, or tell you they enjoyed the show, or they have some thoughts or questions around this space?
Yeah, so just I'm on LinkedIn, Zac Reynolds, but you can go to the agency's website. It's actually just really simple, BOC.agency. We've gone away from .com. So BOC.agency is the a website, and but feel free to DM me on LinkedIn or whatever as well. So happy to help out, even if it's just for advice, or even if it's someone that wants to come through the ranks, or they're an on-air talent that is in a regional area and they've got a good idea, or they want to hit this space. I'm happy to give some advice for some people that are looking to get into this industry.
Awesome. Well, it's certainly not a space that I've spent enough time looking into and had enough conversations about. So I do appreciate all of your thoughts and perspective on this. It's been an interesting chat for me to learn. So, Zac, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it, mate.